Hello and welcome to another episode of Speculative Speculations. I'm Varsha.
I'm Jared.
I'm Steve.
I'm Carl.
Chris.
Well done, Chris.
And this is a series where we talk about speculative stories in all their forms. Today we start our read-through of Cloud Atlas. We usually do approximately 100 pages each week. We are reading or discussing, not actually reading here, but we already read maybe the first 86 pages of Cloud Atlas, which is the first two sections, whose names I'm not going to try and remember. The short story for this week is Plenitude by Will Worthington, as we work our way through the big book of science fiction. The short story for next week is The Voices of Time by J.G. Ballard. It is a long story. It's 20 pages long, which is long in that book because it's 2 walls of text. Anyway, the first two sections of Cloud Atlas. Oh, I forgot. We are going to be reading the next two sections for next week, which will be up to about 170 pages or so. Again, not going to try to remember the name of the sections, but the next two, 100 pages. Cool. First two sections. I wanted to ask before we get into the actual discussion, is this a reread for anyone besides me?
Personally.
And has everybody seen the movie?
Yes.
I did. I don't remember very much about it, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. I don't remember anything about it.
I liked the movie. I thought it was kind of neat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember liking it.
Nice. I have read and seen the movie, but I don't remember very much. So this, but I think some of it is sort of coming back to me, which is nice. Always nice on a reread when I think I've forgotten everything and things come back. But yes, Carl, you wanted to read this book together. So do you want to start us off with high-level thoughts?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, it's good to be back after my disaster trying to schedule into Parable of the Sower, which I did finish and enjoy. Yeah, Cloud Atlas. I mean, I've heard so much about it, and David Mitchell as an author is someone who I think is greatly admired. Both, he sits in a very interesting position in terms of being someone who is read by genre readers, sci-fi fantasy readers, and more literary fiction readers. He's often shelved in literary fiction, but a lot of his works, by my understanding, include a lot of traditional sci-fi or fantasy elements. And so I've always been intrigued by him. I haven't read any of his books. And Cloud Atlas is a book, I mean, honestly, I've seen the movie, so that's part of the reason I wanted to read it. And I remember liking the movie. And I remember thinking it was really strange and creative, and I don't know how different it's supposed to be from the book. So I'm intrigued to watch the movie after I'm done with all of this. But honestly, I got to give credit to the YouTuber Jimmy Nuts, who I saw read the book last year, and that was I think it was his book of the year. And he talked about it all the time, and so I was like, okay, I tend to like a lot of the stuff Jimmy likes, so I really should give it a shot. And in terms of my thoughts, I think it's I'm quite intrigued. I would say probably the first half or first 3/4 of the first short story was really difficult for me, as well as the first several pages of the second. They're not short stories, but section. The first one in particular, the language was so dense and so stylized compared to what I'm used to reading, that I found it difficult to emotionally connect with. But thankfully, over the years, I have developed a large enough vocabulary that it wasn't completely lost. And I found that to be really crucial because, there were times where it definitely seemed like, he was reaching for the $10 word, as opposed to going for something much simpler, which you find is often encouraged in modern books. And
So you couldn't connect with the stuffy old Englishman then?
right. Exactly. I think he's American.
Yeah, he didn't. Yeah, yeah, that's right. He is American, but It still
But
felt that way.
yeah, no, I mean, what stood out to me though immediately was how subtle and understated a lot of the depth was, both in terms of the characters and their complexities, and also the drama and the thematics of what was going on. Um, you would get uh, a line or two in passing about something that to me seemed like really quite important, or really alluded to something really crucial about the character. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm like struggling to think of something, of course, but I ultimately did enjoy it, and by the end of the second section, I was really hooked. I don't know if we want to start, section by section, how we want to do this. Start with the stuffy American, as it were, or what? But
Yeah,
I
we
don't know.
could
What
do
are
that.
your thoughts? Or I don't know if
Like,
anyone has any grand big picture thoughts about all of this.
I mean, your experience are pretty much echoes mine as well, Carl. I thought for a certain part of it, I said, why is this like reading treacle in some ways?
Yeah.
It's, and I think it is because it is entirely stylized. I think from both sections, they have a very different feel and tone to them in the way that the character presents their thoughts, and especially for the first one. When you have like sort of indigenous people wrapped up as well, it creates its own like language system as well, and you're like, oh, what is to what end? But then you get like the very small interlockings between the story and it's like that kind of breadcrumb feel of right. Okay, you give me a tiny breadcrumb in this story that links to the last one, therefore I can sort of see a connection between them. And by that stage, once you get to that point, you're like, okay, I'm sort of along for the ride now of these sort of like connected stories part of it, and I can feel like a tapestry kind of being built up for me. Of one section through to the next, you can kind of see it in making a sort of cohesive narrative in some way, even though they feel very different.
I want to interject very quickly, just ask, while we're talking, something you said kind of made a light bulb go off in my brain, Chris, which is I started noticing some like thematic connections, but I was looking for something more direct, and I didn't notice any, and so I'm curious if I missed anything. Like specifically for me, I noticed kind of an exploration that was particularly subtler. I found in the second part about kind of human nature and savagery. Like the word savage kept coming up, and I think it's very apparent about how it was used in the first section. The second one, like I specifically think of how um, the lover, the wife of the great composer, was described as being like a savage lover, and the way that like human instinct kind of could come out, in the way that like music could instigate that. It stood out to me, but I was just curious if there was like more direct connections between the two that I just didn't catch up on, or didn't catch, because that was something I was actively thinking about.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was actually glad when we got to the second section that there was such a change in tone in how it was written and presented, and I marveled at it because it takes some chops as a writer to be able to get into a completely different headspace like that,
Oh
and
yeah.
actually have a completely different usage of words and tone um, and convey that convincingly. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I was glad to do that because I just didn't really like that first guy that much, and um and uh and the tone he set out for was very 19th century, very as it should have been, because that's when it took place, but not exactly my favorite you know thing to read all the time. Sometimes it's okay, but not all the time. And I was like, oh good, the whole book's not going to be like that, we can move on to something else. But at the same time, it has that abrupt ending where you don't really find out uh what, from his point of view, what's going to happen to him. I have an odd feeling we may get hints and stuff later on, finding out about this guy, as we did with that little hint in the library that we got in the second section. But
I'm sorry, what was the library thing? Because that's what I'm saying. This sounds like something that was explicit, that I feel like I missed something.
in the library when the second character was going through it, he found this guy's journal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Missing the
He
first section of it, and
from the first section.
he
He
sort of
found
said
it,
like,
and
yeah,
he was equally perplexed as we, the reader, were at how it ended, or how it didn't end. It just abruptly stopped. And
Fantastic.
so,
Okay.
yeah, and so the so that you have that connection, but that's like you said, it's very quick and it's very almost secondary to the musician's character story. But I wonder, going on, I have an odd feeling that we're going to see more connections as
Yeah.
we go through, and
Get
based
that
on
feeling as
Basha's smirk, I know that's going to be true. But so so I appreciated that. He's definitely a super skilled writer. He
Mm-hmm.
definitely knows what he's doing, and I really appreciated that aspect of it. And I'm hoping that as we move on, even the title of the next section is the
The first
actually
Louisa
no
Ray mystery.
the first word in the next section is a name from the second section. So yeah,
Mhm.
so I know it's all going to be connected, and I know some stuff is going to tie in more as we go along, and which just is great. It makes me look forward to it more, and I look forward to seeing different voices as we progress here. So a little bit of a rough start with that guy's introduction and that guy's writing. Interesting situation. With when he found the his stowaway, and what he had to do to kind of protect him and stuff like that. So that was very interesting, but it was told in that letter style that doesn't give you all the information.
That was when
And
I got hooked. Was
yeah,
the stowaway? That was when
right,
I noticed an emotional shift where I was like, okay, now this is getting interesting. I was like
right,
kind of intrigued when they talked about the Maori essentially doing what was done to them. I was like, okay, that's an interesting, complex situation there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
this tribe of people who are like, you know, almost seem like the noble savage trope. And so I was like curious to see where all that went. And the stowaway, I was like, I was really on board with that.
yeah. As he pointed out, not so noble at sometimes, but yeah.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I read a little bit about Maori, the English Maori interaction in history.
Well,
So
I meant the
it,
other. I'm blanking on the
it's
name.
Moriori, and I was
Moriori.
kind of
Yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
I was kind of wondering if I'm not sure if that's real or made up or not. I'll have to
I
research
wanted
that.
to look it up too.
Yeah,
I had that thought too as I was reading. I was like, is
but
this real or is it
um,
based on something real?
yeah, so
I kept
that'd be
thinking
interesting.
Moriarty. I that's how I remember this. I was like the
Moriori.
Moriarty tribe.
So that'd be
Yeah.
interesting to
There,
look that
there's a
up.
wiki page entry for that. That's not just a Cloud Atlas wiki. So
Oh, good.
Interesting.
Okay,
interesting.
awesome.
Is Adam Ewing a real person then?
well,
Probably not.
Oh, good question there too.
Because my thought was maybe the reason I missed it in the second section, the mention of the journal, was I could not remember any of the characters'
Characters'
names
names,
in the first section, and so I think it just like washed right over me. But it is distinct. I think that the character's name is Adam. Like I feel like that may be, and it's the first section we're reading. Maybe I'm reading too much into things. We'll see how all that plays off. But
Oh, I never thought about that.
that is a very interesting idea. We should come back to that when we finish the book.
yeah.
So intrigued, I would say overall.
It's funny because the book to me, when I was going through it, felt, oh, this is very unusual. But it definitely harkens back to some of those classic sci-fi books that we're talking about. Kind of to your point, Card, at the start, is that he sort of kind of furnishes this line between lit fic and very much established genre fiction, as say. Like the first part, not that I ever want to really relive this book, was very Olaf Stapledon's First and Last Man. It was very much about the journey of man.
Oh, yeah.
And about the setting up of the system. And actually there's a section I'd sort of highlighted in here where it talked about the Maori people, the Moriori people, sort of mimicking the colonizers, so to speak, when they slayed the other people, and you kind of get a sense of that civilization sort of eating itself, and how individuals impose themselves on the society around them, that kind of stuff. And then went on to, as you say, that moment when he finds a story, you get an idea who the character Adam Ewing is and his values and who he is, because at that point he's the nameless protagonist so much that you kind of put yourself into his place as the avatar, almost as like an emotionless person, but we get a sense of his values. And when we get to the second section with our protagonist, we think that those two characters are sort of linked in some ways, but they're very, very different values wise, as we find out. And we sort of feel that they're starting in the same place, but then we actually, get a sense that they are quite different people. And I think that's where a lot of the intrigue now sets up, is that you've had two storylines with two male characters that could similarly be, the same person, but clearly aren't in a lot of ways, or certainly are very different people in terms of what they're setting out to do and what they're wanting to do, because both characters are sort of traveling or on a journey. Obviously Ewing is on the boat to try and get from one place to another. Our second guy, whose name I can't even remember, it's kind of to your point, who
Dorian
is trying
Gray.
Yeah.
Yeah. Robert Frobisher.
Frobisher, that's him.
Yeah.
He's trying to, what you think is build a career for himself, but he's actually there to make money.
Oh yeah.
And they're both not very likable people either, right? So it's not like you can really get behind them. And Adam Ewing, I mean, I think for his time and age, he's a respectable person, but he has some values that I guess we wouldn't necessarily agree with today, and possibly just for that reason, he's less than likable. And I don't know if that's by design or if that's just because that's how we think now. Surely it was the same 20 years ago when the book came out. But also our other guy who there was such a fine balance between almost liking him and just when you start to warm up to him, it's okay, he's going to go and sell some books from the library without telling the guy, and he wants to take credit for work that one's also a pretty gray area where he thinks that his contribution is large, but maybe not. It's unclear at the moment. So I wanted to bring up the question of unreliable narrators. I think, in my opinion, that comes up a lot when we have first-person narratives. But these two, you really cannot believe too much of what they say, or just the fact that they don't have all the information. For instance, in the bit that what's the name of the second guy? I don't know either. But when the composer guy finds the name of Robert Frostbite, Frost.
The Moriarty tribe. We have Robert Frostbite. We're collecting some names here. This is good.
Frobisher. That's it.
Frobisher. Yeah.
So that guy, when he finds the book in the library for Adam Ewing's journal, he says that guy's clearly a vampire and is the doctor, and is basically bleeding him for his money, which is an interesting thought because the doctor refuses his money. So maybe he wants to be let in on the will of some sort. I don't know. It's curious why he thinks that. And now suddenly I have to rethink all of those interactions. So I think that was a big aha moment for me. And it might have been even the first time I read the book, but that little bit of connection, like you said, Chris, that goes back to the previous section. I think that was pretty brilliant. And if it does build up in the next few books, which I won't tell you whether it does, it would be pretty brilliant. For once, I didn't just read ahead or read the last page. I actually know because I read the book before, albeit more than 14 years ago. So.
I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm waiting for him to get caught and there to be some drama. Although with the gothic nature of that section, I could definitely see like him getting caught and like that leading to like the rich composer guy like having a heart attack, and this is after he's like written the guy into his will or something. And so Robert, I don't know. I can't decide yet if this story is going to end with him inheriting all of the rich guy's money or broke and, miserable, going back to his boyfriend, wherever his boyfriend lives.
But he is interesting. I like him sort of being akin to a vampire because you definitely get that sense. There's a Dracula vibe
Yes.
to him where he's sucking
Oh,
up
yeah.
people. Like he's got the wife in love with him. He has the husband in love with him. And it's sort of implied that he has the daughter as well. I think as well there's something going on
Yeah.
there with the daughter. So he's almost like a bit of a gigolo in some ways. Like he sort of presents himself as this unassuming stranger coming into their home, but by his virtue of being there and not leaving, he kind of gets a little bit,
That's
sucks a bit off
interesting.
everybody and around the house around him. He's an interesting character because you start off liking him and then kind of veer very heavily off him
Well,
as you come through.
I mentioned, jokingly, Dorian Gray, right? Which he reminds me very strongly of Dorian Gray. Like they're very much of the same kind of gothic archetypal mold of this young man who is obsessed with glory and wealth, and who comes from who is seemingly attractive, right, and queer, obviously, and very intelligent, but also just very like awful, two-faced, manipulative, like willingly plays people. And I am intrigued by and curious, part of my, beyond just like my dramatic investment in where things are going, I'm curious to see the sort of comments that David Mitchell is making on a lot of these gothic stories, because that to me was like, seemed like the obvious influence, like the picture of Dorian Gray, because you get the sense that each section is playing off a specific like genre, right? And maybe I'm misreading it, but everything from the mention of vampires to the Jane Austen style like luxury of the setting, but at the same time it's portrayed in a way where everything, the shadows are described, and it's a lot of sex and despair and uncertainty and tension, and it's not very romantic. I feel that it is playing with a lot of those gothic conventions, and I'm very curious to see how it separates itself, or the commentary it makes on them. I noticed, the kind of the waif, I guess, the daughter is already introduced in a way that, like, she was the one who I immediately stood out to me as being different than a lot of those kind of traditional gothic characters, in terms of one being portrayed as villainous, but also as like, there's still the youth and the innocence and the beauty to her, and the ambiguity of her sexuality, whether or not she has entered into a sexual relationship, and that she also is the one person who, I mean, we'll see. Because there is the implication that there is some sexual dynamic there between her and Frobisher, but I think she's the one person who really kind of sees him for who he is and calls him out. And you want to talk about the unreliable narrator? I suspect that she may be, while maybe kind of spoiled and princess like, she may be more pleasant, I guess you could say, than the narrator makes her seem, because he in his letters, of course, is going to highlight this young woman's adversarial attitude with him and her unpleasant attributes, and how rotten and awful, although he even seems to respect her, right? And I believe calls her like very much like him, like they're like twins spiritually, which is interesting in and of itself.
Yes, but he's off the mark because he's unreliable.
Right.
And we don't know that she would go to the same depths as he does to deceive his way into this relationship with the composer that he does, all for the
Exactly.
sake of avoiding embarrassment. because he doesn't want to reveal his his estrangement from his family, and so he's very shifty, and yeah, you kind of the daughter is played off as being cold towards him, but you also kind of know in the back of your mind she's kind of right about him. So you have to, you're like, okay, she's right though. And then of course, what's the situation with her going around with their, what she called her uncle or whatever, um, in
Which is
quotes
what he
there.
calls his lover, by the way. I did catch that, right? That or did she call him the uncle or cousin? Or
Something like
maybe it is
that,
the
yeah.
exact same thing. Or I mean, it's the guy she's living with, right? And then yeah, he calls his lover his uncle, which
You
is
mean the guy he's writing to?
yes, yeah, that's his excuse when his boyfriend sends him money. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is my uncle who really dotes on me and is worried about me."
Yeah, and so it was interesting, and it was an interesting comparison to the I don't remember why. I know the character in Adam Ewing in the first story, he was going back home when he's taking that boat. But I don't remember the exact circumstances of why he had to get on that particular boat.
That was the ship he came in, I think, and it hit a storm and needed a lot of repairs, so they stopped at wherever he was writing the journal entries from.
Oh.
But the repairs were done, and he was just heading back to his planned destination.
Yeah, but why did the captain dislike him so much? That was, because I know he had good relations with the doctor on the boat. But why did the captain dislike him so much? Because he was so worried. He definitely had an attitude towards him, and that's why he was so worried about his stowaway and getting in trouble. And the captain told him, I have no problem throwing you overboard if you act up or whatever. And and so I couldn't remember why that situation was the way it was.
I thought it was because of the stowaway, and if they thought he was defending this like
No, he was kind
random
of rude towards him even before they knew about
okay.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. Okay, interesting. That isn't. Yeah,
That is interesting that there's a character within it that is suspicious of the narrator, if you know what I mean. So, with the captain to Adam and then the daughter to him. The daughter strikes me as a modern character, almost out of time in some ways, because she comes from a family that obviously has means, but is very living her own life outside of that, and only kind of travels home every now and again to kind of see. But her parents are sort of afraid, especially the mother's afraid of her. She's not worried about her husband finding out; she's worried about the daughter finding out about the relationship, which I think is quite interesting in that way. And similarly, I think both stories have characters that act out of the norm for the time they're in, so are against what social conventions of those characters. So the stowaway is seen as an opportunist at the start, but it turns out that he is an experienced deckhand. He is somebody that adds value to the thing, even though they kind of use pejorative like Blackie and stuff within the story to kind of describe him as being less than, but actually is bringing off actually a lot more value than our narrator, actually, the book and the story in a lot of ways. And then similar, the daughter kind of living her own life outside of the family thing, and the family being, like say, the kind of overtures of the Gothic novel, the very chaste romance, the woman that's more invested in the man and the relationship, and all of those kind of things that we can recognize from an awful lot of literature at that time. Those beats are all there, but there's just something a little bit at a place in both stories with a modern tinge, whether that's that we have a queer character or anything like that. You kind of see the beats of the literary novel there being written in the modern times, but harkening back to all of those kind of stories from.
I push back on a little bit, just in terms of like, I mean, the young woman in the second section, I'm with you that she is unusually independent, but that sort of strong-mindedness definitely brings to mind like Jane Austen's characters, like
Yeah,
that fierce
that's fair.
intelligence and things
Yeah.
like that. At the same time, I do kind of get the sense that she is like, I don't know. We'll see where that character goes. The queerness, though, to me, like very much feels in line with like Dorian Gray and that
Yeah.
like interesting, you know, navigating the world through the like, you know, the kind of expected heteronormativity, you know, that everyone's going to get married and, you know, all that. And, you know, like the woman he's sleeping with, I guarantee could not even imagine that he has an older boyfriend, you know, back home. Right. And so in that way, you know, and the kind of the way that relationship, like there are aspects, I guess, that feel a little modern, but it also feels very much of its time in terms of like the way that he explores his sexuality and doesn't like label it. Like we're really obsessed with labels in this day and age.
Yeah.
And also that like to him, I mean, does he love he says he loves his sixsmith, you know, the guy he's writing to, but like, does he really, you know, like that's a question for me. And
He loves getting his money every once in a while.
It's a
right,
vampire for him as well.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right. I mean, why do we have any reason to think that his relationship with Sixsmith is any different than his relationship with the composer, you know? I and so all of that stuff to me feels very much of the Gothic template, but just maybe with a yeah. I mean, maybe there's a bit of modern sprinkling too. It's interesting. Steve, I'm curious about your thoughts about all this. We haven't heard from you yet.
No, just listening to I missed the library connection. I didn't catch that. But one thing when you mentioned the Gothic feel to the first section, you kept referencing his coffin, and I thought it was a metaphor for something else. I thought it was like, but now it's okay, it makes sense. I didn't catch that. It took me a little while to get into a groove with the first section, especially because the way that it was told through the journal entries. And I wondered if him protecting the stowaway was self-preservation, or was he really truly trying to do something right? Because he does seem to hang on to some. It's as far as his faith goes, like it's the right thing to do for him. But I wonder how much of that is really self-preservation, because if the stowaway gets caught, then he's in trouble too. So, but yeah, it was a weird. I wasn't really sure what to expect after seeing the movie. So it's quite a bit of change from the movie, but yeah, so far I like it.
Nice. I would like to. I plan to rewatch the movie when we get towards the end of the book, but I'd like to talk about book versus movie too, if you all are up for it. But speaking of Dorian Gray, there was a very nice Dorian Gray joke in the second section,
Yeah,
I
there
think.
was.
When he was it the guy who he sells the books to? He says, "Does he have a portrait of himself that's turning younger every year? How does he look so
Yeah,
ugly?"
that's right.
That's what I'm saying. The second section, like, very explicitly is playing with that. Does anyone have any idea of like what the first section? Like you mentioned, I think the kind of old,
Yeah, it
like sci-fi
reminded
novel.
me a lot of Moby Dick, with
Moby Dick. Okay.
some of the way that people acted on the ship and stuff like that. But it definitely, I don't get this same thematic feel as Moby Dick out of this at all.
Mm.
It just, the style kind of reminded me of Melville, the way he wrote and stuff like that. But I don't know if it's a direct reference to anything in particular in literary history at all.
I feel
And
like it's got to be. There's got to be some sort of like genre of
Yeah,
fiction,
could be. Yeah.
just because to me, like there's such a clear Gothic parallel with the second story, and then the next one, the title of the next one makes me think, okay, we're getting into whodunits of some kind, probably a noir whodunit. Just get the way the time period keeps advancing,
Yeah. I mean,
and I feel like they're all going to be a different genre.
unless we go
And that's
back
how I
to
remember the
these,
movie.
yeah, unless we go back to these characters and the stowaway ends up being like just an opposite type of pastiche of Tweakog or something like that. But I don't know. I don't know how it's going to go. So I'm just reaching here.
In in the second book, in the second part, Robert compares Ewing to, I don't know, some Melville's work, the journal, but I don't know if it's Moby Dick he's referencing.
Well, maybe. Oh, that's right. He
Interesting.
does compare
Good
it
catch.
to
Yeah.
fiction, doesn't he?
He says Ewing puts me in mind of Melville's bumbler Captain Delano in Benito Sereno. Is that a different book?
So, yeah, that's a different book. So, or maybe a short story. I'm not sure, but you know, so it is. It did feel like Melville. I wasn't too
You're
far.
onto
I'm
something.
onto
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Were there any distinct parallels or similarities that you guys noticed between the two narrators? That was something else I was trying to think about, but
Yeah.
I just felt like they were very different. So I don't know.
It's kind of strange because they both weren't wonderful people, and they both relied on others to a certain extent to you know, to get by, to do what they needed to do, and they both had this sense of um kind of the sense of like they were owed something. You know what I mean? Like the what was the guy's job in the first one? He was kind of
He was a notary. I
a
think
notary.
he was
That's right.
executing
Yeah.
wills. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he kind of had this sense like he deserved a certain amount of respect and that people should, you know, do it comply with his wishes in a polite way. That, he was very, very, polite about it and uppity about it. But he had that sense that, why would people want to be going against him? Why wouldn't they help him, basically? And then the second guy was totally expectant on other people to give him a living, basically, and he was going to do whatever he could in order to make that happen. And so they were definitely flawed characters who are likable on some level and unlikable as well at the same time. And I'm wondering if that is going to how that's going to play out with if we get back to these guys in this book.
And much more manipulative. While I almost got this sort of, I mean, I guess he alludes to it by the bumbling sea captain Melville reference in the second section, but I almost got the sense that he was like kind of naive. Adam was kind of naive, and while he was very much a man of his time, and that was grating, and there were times I'm with you that he did seem a little stuck up, but at the same time he was horrified by the genocide, for example. Like that was something that stood out to me, that I didn't necessarily expect. And similarly, my reaction was the opposite of Steve's to the stowaway. Was I felt like the obvious thing would have been, and maybe this is the skewing of perspectives based on the unreliable narrator, but the obvious thing would have been to sell the stowaway out. I mean, that guy is like less than a person to all of these people, Like it would be so easy to just say, yeah, toss him overboard. He hid in my room. Like, screw this guy. I actually had to take a step back and think about how would I react to someone stowing away in my room, And this guy ultimately was like, no, that's okay. Like he spoke up in defense of the guy. And that to me seemed like a very noble decision, and actually was the thing that made me like him for the first time properly, in a way that the other character, Robert, well, I really enjoy reading about him because I love reading about horribly manipulative, self-destructive people. My favorite TV show is Succession. I love it. But he's like not a good person. Like he's like just straight up bad. Like even by the standards of his time, like he's doing a lot of really terrible things, and he doesn't seem to have any sort of regret about it. And the big similarity I felt like between the two was they both lacked self-awareness. They both seemed very intelligent, but not at all aware of kind of their own inner self.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But I don't know. That was just how I read it.
Yeah. He built up the Maori and the Moriori connection quite a bit. And so him being sympathetic to the stowaway wasn't out of left field, because he had built that up
Right.
quite a bit as before you even got on the boat. There was a lot of explanation of their society, a lot of their in his knowledge that sometimes came secondhand, but still he conveyed it in his letter. And so that definitely thematic, narrative wise, it didn't come out of left field that he would have some sympathy for
Agreed.
the stowaway. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Like the first character, Ewing, has somebody vouch for him. That's why the stowaway goes to him, as somebody that actually has recognized him, whether it's through his faith or otherwise, that he's a man that can be trusted. Whereas obviously Frobisher doesn't have that. But like the attitudes towards, because of colonialism or whatever else he's talking about, of how people treat that stowaway character, in a similar way, the attitudes in the second section to Frobisher, who's looking at these people of wealth and means, like the line that I pulled out of it that kind of sums him up is, money can't buy you happiness. Obviously, had far too much of the stuff. Those who say that obviously have far too much of the stuff, and I think that's his sort of motive being when he goes to this house and see these people, and is kind of saying like, I'm just taking stuff that they don't even realize they have, if you know what I mean. He's sort of justifying it for himself in that way, but it also makes us look and kind of go, well, you're also sleeping with a wife, you're taking the money, you're kind of passing your work off as his own. Like there's literally, you're almost like trying to be a chameleon, trying to be like the other son in it. You're kind of putting yourself in a position where you're basically living off their existence, in a lot of ways. You do see a very stark difference by the end of his story to compare to Ewing's, who actually did stand up, although quite, to the point where he's like, I just found him. Don't blame me. There was a self-protection mode of that because he knew it was kind of dodgy for himself. And it was only when the character was able to prove that he was a deckhand that it kind of all became okay at that stage. But there was that moment where he went, oh, this guy's playing me for a fool. I'm going to be getting thrown overboard. But yeah, they're interesting characters. The other thing to point out is that they both seem like very young men. And both of there's an age aspect to that. And it could be about the growth of character given a time period in their life, what people are like as young men and their kind of attitudes to life and that kind of stuff at that time compared to maybe later on in life.
There's also the fact that that little what's the word I'm looking for? Shrine that he falls into in the crater. He takes care not to tell anyone else that that's there, and so that it doesn't get plundered and sold. So yeah, he does seem to have an aspect of nobility about him that the other guy at the moment seems to completely lack.
Okay, that's a great jumping off point. The shrine, that was a crazy scene. Was that real? Did that actually happen? Was that like was magic happen? What was going on? There was like the heart, and the salamander came out of the heart. What was going on there? I'm very curious about y'all's thoughts about that.
Wait, I thought it was just a bunch of tree statues, and salamander is a real lizard, right? Is it, or
Yes.
is it okay? Yeah, I thought it was just a carving and a random creature moved amongst the trees.
I thought there was a real heart, like
They were animal hearts, right?
Oh yeah, there were dead people there, right? Yeah.
I thought it was a human heart. I thought these were like human entrails, and
yeah, he intimated that it could have been, but then he also said, no, I think it was probably just an animal heart that they hung up.
Yeah, but usually when people say, "Oh no, it's probably just an animal heart," it's a human heart, right? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
Then we
trying
already know
to.
these
Yeah,
people are cannibals. Like they're like killing. Like that's a human heart, right? And a salamander came out of a human heart. Like there's some shit's going on there, and at the very least, it's symbolic.
I thought it was a half-eaten heart that just sort of like he saw a salamander come out of it, but it was in the area and it looked like it came out of it. I don't know. That's my interpretation of it. But if it actually came out of a heart, then but also he has this ailment that is apparently a parasite that grows on him, and Dr. Henry Goodall or whatever his name is the only person who can treat him.
That's right.
It's not
literal
a
parasite.
salamander. His ailment with a capital A is not a salamander. Right? But but also he was saying it's an animal heart, so he can justify to himself not revealing the location of the area.
Yeah, it did seem like a rationalization exercise on his
Yeah.
part to kind of make sense of it and not think about the horrors or thinking about um anything like that. You know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Anybody else like the vibe between the two stories? To link it to another piece of science fiction, bit fifth head of Cerberus. I kind of felt I get very strong fifth head of Cerberus by
Yeah, I was
Gene
thinking
Wolfe
of
in it.
that too.
Yeah,
Especially
Yeah.
because one of the stories has this connection with the local quote unquote savages,
Yeah.
and if not only a remote connection, but he fell into a crater.
Yeah. But it was that connection between the second and third books of Fifth Head and Cerberus I kind of thought was very, reminiscent of the relationship between these two people, which again sort of bleeds into this idea that there is more of a connection here than appears necessarily between the two stories. There is a link that we should be looking for.
Yeah, yep. But maybe there will continue to be a link until the next time.
And it definitely falls into, like, sometimes stories when you read them, and I'm not surprised this is because this is like sections of narratives, so you don't get that build up engagement of character that would happen very quickly. This is a book that falls very much into the intriguing. It has set up a world of possibilities and the kind of, like, it's giving you a little bit of from in a second story, but like the cards point to start, you're looking for thematic clues kind of the way across, but we've only got 2 bits so far. Maybe the time we have 4, we kind of get a better sense of putting everything together at that stage, and what we make of that as a reader.
Yeah,
You know,
we're just
the book.
grasping right now. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh, grasping. Yes. The book I'm reminded of, to some degree, was Hyperion by
Right,
Dan
Dan
Simmons.
Simmons.
If any of y'all have read it or are familiar with it, because not only like the different genres of stories going on, but kind of a connective tissue through line. There, it's much more clear because the book is like the Canterbury Tales. It's like people telling a story to each other, and there's a very obvious through line of the Shrike, which I won't define or get into for anyone who hasn't read it, but there's a very clear connections there. And I guess we have the journal now, but I other than that, I am struggling beyond maybe some thematic connections. How to connect everything. And so I'm waiting for that moment for kind of the ball to drop. I do have some vague memories of the movie, and so I'm wondering. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil anything if I'm remembering anything correctly, or if the movie does translate to the book in any way. But we'll see. I'll talk about that in a later episode, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah, when we get to the end, I'll definitely rewatch the movie because I don't remember any of it. I remember even less of the movie than I remember of the book. But that should be a fun discussion. Oh man, I was gonna say something. I forgot.
Yeah, there
it.
is Benito Serena was a novella by Herman Melville
Hmm.
that had a awkwardly passive captain, and slaves display remarkably inappropriate behavior. And the writer, the passenger, decides he is being paranoid. So I wonder how that's going to tie in.
Interesting. Yeah, I think this book will likely turn out to be a lot about the structure, like the way the stories tie together, and also I think the way the role the language plays. The 20th anniversary edition has an introduction by an author whose name I don't know, but Gabriel Zevin, like who I hadn't heard of before. But there's a footnote in there that talks about how David Mitchell described his strategy as creating temporal distance by changing language. So I think that would be an interesting thing to watch out for. Um, across the stories that we read. The first two already we talked a lot about how different they are stylistically, and also I guess as representing maybe genres of literature, but also the and the interesting bit about both of them were they were manuscripts of some sort, right? Letters the and the journal, which is like people of that time actually putting things down in language of that time. It's not an author telling you that story from a distance, which if you compare other books that are somewhat similarly structured, like Sea of Tranquility comes to mind. All four
Mm.
stories in there, they are, if I remember correctly, told from the third person perspective. And I saw some additional parallels between Sea of Tranquility and Cloud Atlas, but that's a discussion for another time. But so that one doesn't do much with language. It just does because it's one person presumably telling the story across the four threads. But here each person of that time is telling their own story, which makes for a lot of experimentation that you can do with language, which Mitchell has definitely engaged in. So that should be interesting to look out for as we make our way.
Agreed.
Yeah, that it's interesting you note how he almost wanted to change languages, because one of the things that I kept thinking and I reflected on before we discussed this, and actually as we were discussing this, is that that first section is very opaquely written in a way that like similar works of the time period are not necessarily that, like it's almost like James Joyce in terms of how it's not breaking grammar rules as much as James Joyce does, but the language is so dense and so like it's like intentionally hard to read in a way, like it feels alien, right? In some sense, in a way that like if we were to talk about, you know, I think the second section is intentionally in conversation with Gothic literature. But if you go to those like classic Gothic texts, which were written 50 years, 40 years before the first section is supposed to take place, right? In the 19th century, or wait, no, it takes place in the ninth. I'm mixing it up. 1930. When does the first one take place?
1830 something. Yeah.
1830s.
Yeah, the second
Oh, wait,
guy
the second
places
one
it
is in
at
the
4950.
The
1930s.
second one's
Yeah.
1930s, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm maybe talking out of my ass then. Never mind. I was thinking it was more recent. I was going to say, my point being that like a lot of texts written in the 19th century are like relatively more legible than the first one. You know, like not that like, you know, it was like impossible to understand what they were saying, but just that it required a lot more effort than I feel like I read Dorian Gray for the first time last year or the year before. And fantastic book, by the way. It reads really well relatively. And Oscar Wilde has very colorful, very vibrant prose, but like it is much more readable in terms of like it's much easier to parse what he's saying sentence to sentence than uh the first section here is. But I don't know. I was clearly talking out of my ass, at least to some degree, because I was thinking it took place much more recently, the events of it, than they actually did. So maybe there's, I don't know. I also haven't read Herman Melville, so I don't know if that's Herman Melville thing that he writes very
It
opaquely.
is.
Okay, it is.
It wasn't as boring as Moby Dick is, but hot
It
take.
wasn't as boring as Moby Dick. Okay, good to know. Everyone I talk to either loves or hates that book. I've been put it on the back burner for a long time, but I'm intrigued. I'm sorry. I'm also going to sidebar really quickly. I've been talking a lot, but I'm very curious, Jared. I've been looking at your on Riverside, your like title. arbitrary relativity, that has to be an inside joke. What's the context for
That's
that?
a vague reference to the short story we're about to discuss.
Oh, okay.
Jared
Okay.
always picks his name based on the short story.
Good. All right, we'll take that as a foreshadowing then.
And a segue, possibly.
Or as a segue, yeah.
Or a segue. Yeah.
Or a segue. So, do we have any other topics for Cloud Atlas before we move on?
No.
I had one question though before we move on. What did you guys think about the way in which music was described? Because recently I read some books that described music really beautifully. Johnny Words comes to mind, of course, and then there was some stuff in Tigana, and this feels very different from those, of course, because it does not describe it as soaringly as those two do, but it was still pretty effective in my opinion. Like it did a really good job of conveying how much music means to this guy, or both of them actually, and what they were like to convey, I guess, the beauty and the effect that the music has on them. I think, casual as the style is of describing it all, it was immensely effective. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually love the how the composer immediately assumed that his student was going to automatically get what he was saying with his rada tum 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 verbiage, and how the student Robert had to tell him, no, tell me the actual notes so I can write them down properly. And I've actually seen that kind of back and forth between student and teacher before in real life. And I am the kind of person who, when I was trying to play music, had to have somebody tell me the damn notes. I can't listen to you do some sort of sound and copy it. I need you to tell me the notes so I can play it. So that actually kind of, like, I understood that perfectly right there. And so it's yeah, you're right, Vasha, that it's a bit more of a scientific approach to the description of music and what they're trying to put together and what they're trying to do. Whereas where the teacher's like giving this flowery phrase and saying it should be this, and the guy's like, no, I need the actual, and whereas like with Janie Worth, she just has this like really beautiful description of how music affects people and and stuff like that. But so it was quite different. Yeah, you're right.
Anybody else want to add to that? Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah. I mean, I think beyond, being captivated by the way it was written about, and the effect it can have on people, I was really intrigued, and maybe this goes beyond music to art as a whole, but how the difference between the Vivian with a Y, the master, the mentor, and Robert, how they viewed music, and specifically in relation to their legacy, and that Vivian thought the right music, the right score, would in some ways make him immortal, which is kind of a classic artistic, egotistical, and I don't even mean that necessarily in a bad way. As a writer, like a part of me very strongly hopes that something I write will live long past me. But Robert very quickly crushes that notion. Like, he does not believe that, or at least he says he doesn't believe that, and thinks it's foolish and it's all gonna waste away, and like none of it ultimately matters. And there's an added dimension of complexity and interest there to me because of the enigma. I don't think it's fully clear, like, what is motivating him. Like, does he just want money? But he talks about wanting to become one of the great composers, or like the great composer, and like you only want to, like, I feel like a part of that motivation is to live after death in some sense through your music, to be like Mozart or Bach, Um, but at the same time, he says that is foolish, that it's not logical, it's not reasonable. There's no reason to live that way. So what is it that's motivating him? And like, what does he really, I'm talking about unreliable narrators, like, how does he actually view his relationship to music? Clearly, he is obsessed with it. He defines his identity in relation to it. But does he view it in some way as like a means to glory and wealth only? Or is there something deeper to his connection to it? And that's something that I am very intrigued by in relation to like how he develops throughout the course of this book and the greater depths to his character, because I'm not sure. I think there's a lot going on there, a lot of paradox that feels very human to me, in the way that we can carry competing notions in our head at the same time and not always be aware of it. And then obviously, again, you have the nobler sort of ideal of the it's not. I don't know if noble is the right idea, but to me, it feels in some way more pure of the idea of like the mentor, Vivian with a Y, uh, who wants his music to like outlast him, and in some way, like that's his legacy more than his daughter, more than anything. It's the music he leaves behind, which I am waiting for the ball to drop and for his music to appear in one of the sections. Like I know that's going to happen. And it's going to be like, haha, you stupid son of a bitch. You thought his music wasn't going to outlive him. Look at you. Although maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be Robert's music. Maybe his name will be the one that comes up. So we'll see.
There are things that spring to mind relating to the book that Varsha talked about earlier, but that would be spoilers for the book that Varsha talked about earlier. In that regard, I thought it was interesting when he was playing the music given to him by his friend, how it was critiqued by, and I kind of was trying to read subtext in that for him criticizing his relationship with his wife that he knew about but didn't know about, but didn't really seem to be like that. But it did seem to be a critique of Frobisher as a person, rather than necessarily about his music that he's listening to. So I thought that was, he lacks intricacy, he lacks counterpoint, he doesn't have very much about him as a human being to make him a great artist in some ways, which was sort of what was being passed to him. But I don't think Frobisher is the kind of person that's sworn enough to receive that in any kind of way that would make any difference to him,
Yeah, I like that.
He sees music everywhere, right? The opening paragraph of that section, for instance. Oh, the dream. I forgot. I wanted to talk about that dream. At first, I didn't register that it was a dream. And I'm like, somebody's just standing there while he's breaking things, trying to hear notes out of it. But that wasn't the case. But he talks about that, about how the various ceramic things that are crashing bring out various notes that he can put together in a piece. And he talks about when the two old men fall asleep, their snores, how he can set it into some form of music for a trombone and a flute or something. Anyway, he sees music everywhere, and at this moment it's unclear to me whether that's an affectation and like he thinks that this is how composers think all the time, or if that's just how he sees the world, and that means that he has the makings of a great composer because he's so passionate about it all. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how his character develops. And yeah, I don't remember, Carl, about the thing you talked about, whether we'll see his music or not. So I'm curious too to see whose music we see in the upcoming stories.
The dream is interesting. Going back to it, I remember thinking it was really interesting imagery, and I totally forgot about it until you mentioned it there. But he's dreaming about like being afraid he's gonna break all of this china, right? Like he's a bull in a china shop, and but that when he breaks it, it makes beautiful sounds, and it makes music, which does in some way kind of feel like the most selfish interpretation of kind of how to create great art. Like it's like that to me. That's like embodies the kind of symbolic ideal, the archetypal ideal of artists who go through life just trying to, to live, right? And it's like, I'm going to sleep with whoever I want to. I'm going to be, I'm going to be a hedonist. I'm going to experience everything. I don't care what the consequences. And it's going to make great art. And like that to me is sort of, seems like what it embodies. But at the same time, there is his anxiety about breaking the things is interesting. That he does, it alludes to maybe some greater depth to his feelings about the damage he does, because he very clearly, with how the story is developing, does seem like he is in a china shop, that he is, and all the china is about to come falling down around him. But we'll see. I don't know. I do also have one more topic whenever you guys, I don't know if you guys have other thoughts about the dreams.
No, I think that's a great point. I didn't realize the connection. Like I didn't make the connection to what's actually going on in the story from the dream, but that totally makes sense, and it's wonderful. It makes me think of this Hindi movie called Rockstar, about a rock star who is convinced by some people that the only way he can make great music is if he's heartbroken and broken from the inside. So yeah, this feels a little bit like that, like he wants to make something great out of broken things. So we'll
That's
see
yeah.
we'll see how that goes.
That's
Go
like
ahead, Kyle.
every rock documentary we ever seen.
Exactly. No, we glorify it. It's like
Yeah,
artists don't come out of create that notion out of nothing. It's sort of this like snake eating its own tail in terms of Ouroboros. That was the word I was looking for. Where artists create these stories about how you have to be tortured to make great art, and then you have all these artists who feel like they have to be tortured to make great art, and it's just like it's constant. I can tell you, having gone to film school, like a lot of people have that attitude unironically, and I do think that there is, thankfully, in the modern day, more of a pushback against like, yeah, you just have to be like a hedonistic asshole and just like go out and just like live however you want. You have to be tortured, and torture people in turn to make great art. But I think there is also the fear, that like there is some truth to the idea that like you need to struggle and be able to understand things to write them, to write what you know. It doesn't have to be literal. It can just be emotional. So I don't know. I have complicated feelings about all of that. Anyway, don't be an asshole is the moral of the story. But
Words to live by for sure.
love is what I wanted to talk about, which is the way in which love is written about in the two sections. And I think it's much more explicit in the second section, but I do think it comes up in the first section as well. The second, obviously, you have this conversation with the wife about how, people are so dumb. I forget if she like targets a specific group of people, if it's like young people or just like people in general, that, they think that like love requires fidelity. And she makes this comment and like thinks she's like, it seems like really deep into her being that she believes this. And then we quickly find that she's still keeping her affair secret. Like she pretends like it's an arrangement, but it's not an arrangement. Like her husband does not know, or actually he kind of knows, but he doesn't like, he's not happy about it, but he also doesn't fully know of what is currently going on. Right. And, you have, I think, in maybe subtler ways, the daughter, her love for her family. Like I think she's defensive of her family and concerned about what's going on, but we'll see how all of that plays out. And then you have, of course, the composer's love, is described as being like a son for this little Dorian Gray, Robert, who comes into the fold. And then in the first section, I what really stood out to me was the sense of like love of humanity. I don't know. I don't know if I'm reading too much into things, but that was a sense I got from Adam was this like genuine, like the noblest ideals of the Christian religion, of like loving people and that sort of thing. And I guess you could, the question is like, do you read that as like genuine, or do you read that as him, sort of superficially embodying that? And that, to me, his seeming disgust with the genocide, and then his ultimate act of what I think was an act of compassion for the stowaway, who I wish I could remember his name. I could look it up, I bet.
Ottawa or something. It started with an A.
I thought it started with an A, right? Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of A names.
Yeah.
You're so good with
Yeah,
names, Marsha.
that
That's bound to be right.
it just, I'm not sure how all the pieces connect together, if at all. I mean, I'm sure they do, because this book clearly is written with thematic intent, but that there is some conversation about love going on, and it's at the forefront in the second section, where, to me, again, in that Gothic tradition, is all about love, romantic love, familial love, love of self, and the question of does that character, the Robert, does he love, or is he just a narcissist, and everyone is just extensions of himself, or what is the depth there to who he is, and then all of the relationships he's creating that play into, like, it's all sexual, like there's a sexual undercurrent to literally every relationship he has that's of note, even if they're not all explicitly sexual. Even the mentor, I feel like there is some added component of like hint of like some potential sexual dynamics. I mean, he talks about how he can play, men or boys, on a whim, and he makes a number of like phallic references, right? And I don't know. I'm just curious about your thoughts, all of y'all's thoughts about how love is written about, and what we've read about it so far.
With Adam Ewing, you have to wonder: is his thoughts in charitable views genuine, or are they what he's supposed to say,
Right.
what he's supposed to think, based upon his upbringing and the teachings that are telling him how he's supposed to act? I don't think we have an answer here, at least not quite yet. But he, that compassion he shows towards the natives in history and in his particular circumstance on the boat, is he just reacting the way he was brought up and taught to be, or does he truly believe what his actions convey? The other guy, like you said already, very well, his is definitely more of a self-serving type of love, and you got to wonder, deep down, does he love himself at all? And if not, is that why he has this falsehood about him?
Which would also be an interesting contradiction to what he claims to the wife, that he cannot love her back because the only person he ever loves is himself. And well, he certainly behaves in a self-serving enough manner that you would think that. But yeah, it's true. Like, does he truly love himself? That is an interesting question. And also, to that point, there was a question about when the senior composer walks to his room at night because he has that violin melody, and he talks to, and he straight up asks him, "Are you having an affair with my wife or not? Or did she make any approaches to you?" And the wife feels disgusted at that moment, or seems unhappy somehow, because she thinks she's like, "My husband loves you." And I was trying to understand her sadness. Is it and also what kind of love she means. Is it in love or just love as in he's really fond of you and she's feeling upset about the fact that she's sort of cheating on him with someone he's fond of? Or is it that she feels cheated on because she thinks that he's in love with the guy? That felt like a very complex emotion that I couldn't get to the bottom of, but just something to think about and ruminate over. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's definitely left up for speculation as far as what she actually means by her sudden disappointment in Robert, because you could take that, like you said, a couple ways. You could take it as she is having this affair with him, but for her it's a fling. It's a fun thing. It's temporary, and you could look at it as, well, if her husband actually does love this guy as a son or in any other way, she really is going to break him, and I don't think she wants to do that. I don't think she wants to go so far as to break her husband. I think she's just looking at this as a fun thing to do on the side. And if he really loves him in that manner, then that's going to be worse when this is eventually found out.
Is it a fling? She we get the thing towards the end there that she
She's a
keeps
little
saying, "I
possessive,
love
yeah.
you."
Yeah.
And he will not say it to her, and she'll get mad at him and go away for a couple days and then come back and inevitably sleep with him again. I think the question certainly is like, is it like real love, or is it like she's projecting her insecurity about like aging or
Yeah, I don't
something like
think it
that?
is.
Like I think that there is ambiguity there, but I don't know. Like, she seems pretty invested in it in a way. That's part of what, to me, makes it so selfish too.
Yeah.
Is it's not just that he is knowingly being a homewrecker, Robert, but that this woman seems to be, in his words, getting attached to him. And he talks about how she won't let him like leave, and that she wants him to stay there forever. And at least the way he writes about it, it seems like he really doesn't care about her, and he really is just there to have sex with her and for the pleasures of that, and then for the knowledge of that she is now a piece he can play on the chessboard.
I don't know. Sometimes it seems like he doesn't always want her there, though.
Right.
And so, and I don't know. I got the sense that that it's part of her game to say, "I love you," and then not show up for 3 days when he doesn't say it back. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's a lot of a lot of interpretation there, a lot of ambiguity.
Yeah. There is a lot of ambiguity. I'm with you. I'm with you on that. There is, not least because it's all written right from his very specific perspective, and not just his perspective, but the perspective he's willing to put to paper, right? And the perspective he's willing to put to paper to send to his boyfriend back in England or wherever he's from. Yeah, it is interesting. One also thing I wanted to highlight when we're talking about like love and religion and everything is his dad, his estranged father, is a priest, and not just a priest, but a priest who he early on describes as being more concerned with like the value of things and what price they would go for. I think that definitely informs this guy's worldview, right? And I think the question, right, is what happened between him and his father? Why was there the blowout?
Oh yeah, that's a mystery. Yeah.
Yes.
Is it possible that Anna Munes is his father?
Does the timeline add up there?
Maybe grandfather, maybe the 100-year difference. Yeah, 2 generations. Yeah.
That would be interesting.
But actually, it can't be because he found the book and didn't recognize the name and stuff. So that seems.
I mean, who knows? Maybe if his like family changed name and like they like disown this guy, like if there's a lot of time, a lot can happen in 100 years. So, I wouldn't completely throw away that theory yet. There's clearly something. There has to be some sort of connection between all of these stories, right? We'll see.
We'll see.
Chris never throws away a good theory.
No. I mean, I've thrown one out there, but I've actually debunked it a little bit before I've even thrown it out. That's very unlike me. You got to stick with it. You just kind of commit to it, commit to the wild theory, and then fall apart later on and say, well,
No,
try.
I'm with you. I think being skeptical of your own theories is a good thing. I think people get too attached to their theories. I love, as Varsha and Steve will know from our Baker read-throughs, I'll just throw shit at the wall. That's how I like to be. Just like keep throwing out new theories. No one ever knows what you're going to say next, and something will stick. And a lot of what you say will be nonsense, but it will make for a good conversation. And that's all you can
Well,
do.
that's what I think as well. It's like it's almost fun being wrong all the time.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah.
What about the button?
The button, yeah, and the monster. I can't wait for the
The
monster
hatch?
to arrive in this book. That's gonna be good shit. Yeah.
No, I think that's why we all like the Area X series so much, because of the theories and ideas that we all came up with, and a lot of them were wrong, but it was still fun to guess.
Yep. I was gonna say, by the time you both have so many theories, by the time some of them come true, you've even forgotten that you had that as a theory.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
many times I've reminded Carl, and I think Chris, sometimes you too, that you made this prediction. And you're like, when? What?
And
That's
you have
true.
to turn around and say, "Oh, it can't have happened. I can't have got one right."
Yeah. You're making it up.
You're misremembering in some way, but that's very kind of you. Yeah.
That's so true. I definitely remember a couple times in the second apocalypse where she'd be like, "No, you said that thing." Like that's like she'd say something, I'd be like, "That's an interesting idea," and it was like, "No, you said that theory when we read the first book," and it was like, "No, I didn't. What are you talking about? I have no memory of saying that ever."
Plenitude by Will Worthington. Are we ready, or are we ready?
We are ready for Plenitude by Will Worthington.
Okay, summary.
Summary. And a man takes his family away from civilization to move out to live a simpler life in the country, in what seems to be a bit of a matrix world, in some way. Yes, and the son and the father go to visit the city.
Oh yeah. What?
And in the last page, shit goes down. For those listening, Varsha didn't read the last page, so.
I mean, I got a glimpse of it. It looks like they destroyed the Matrix. Is that what happened?
They destroyed the Matrix. Yeah, what an interesting story for our Matrix-loving friends out there.
1959, like it's
59,
yes, man.
1959 this was written in, and he was
Wow.
already detailing the Matrix. It's just like, wow, that was pretty cool, I thought.
So essentially, like, to give a bit more of a context, like the son and the father are going through what seems to be a very simple rural lifestyle, and then the son's questioning the father to say, God, what do other people do? People in the city must have it easy compared to us, because they don't have to dig for food, they don't have to do all of this kind of stuff. They go to the city, and what we see in the city is essentially that idea that people are living in bubbles with tubes coming out of it. Essentially, which is very much the Matrix idea, and well, the son gets interesting fatherly lessons.
A little interesting education there, yeah. But one of the lines I really loved out of like the first big paragraph there was when he's talking about his wife, who does all the work, and he says she otherwise filled the numberless gaps in the world, when he's talking about how she's filling out the holes in the walls and all that stuff, and I just love that line because it really encompassed like all the gaps in the world that he sees as problems, and that was like the whole theme that stood out to me. There's like all these problems with the world. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic type situation where he preemptively took his family out into, like you said, into the woods to live there away from it all. But the just that statement of filling the numberless gaps in the world really really stood out to me because it's a societal statement that there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled about life in society in our world, and they are numberless. They continually happening, and they always be there, and they always need to be dealt with, and they are doing their best to try to fill the gaps in their own little world that they live in, and they're living their lives there. The counterpoint to that is, of course, the curiosity of the children. Of course, the older child, wanting to explore those gaps, wanting to know about them, wanting to go out and see them, and they have, of course, a big disagreement. The kid takes off and does his thing, and I just thought that was beautifully done, and I loved it. I thought it was a great story.
Isn't the counterpoint of the idea that the father took them out of that environment because of his life, is the questions that he asked as a young man, and came to the end and basically said, "Run, the best thing for me and my family is to move out of the city," but actually in doing so, his son then comes along and says, "Well, what have we left behind? Essentially, like what am I missing out on?" And he's sort of frustrated by his son, but also kind of trying to educate him in the same way about what it is. But it isn't until he can't give him that experience. He can't let him live his experience. He has to see some of that thing himself. And so his son has a warped sense of life, as it turns out, in the life lessons with his ends in murder. So,
Yeah. and it's in typical teenage fashion, right? The son can't believe it until he sees it. He's not going to take his father's word. He's not going to do anything. I love how the dad was like tossing and turning all night, sweating over their disagreement and stressing about it, and his wife tells him, "Don't worry. If it can't be turned into a drama, if it doesn't exist," which basically explains every teenager ever. and I just thought that was brilliant.
I really love the opening with the younger son. I love that conversation between them. And I think this is one of the more literary stories in this collection. This one read very beautifully and in a very organic way. Like some of the other stories that we read before that were literary in nature, they turn into these action sequences that didn't quite fit with that style, if that makes sense. But this one sort of had just the right balance throughout to work very, very well for me. And there was also the idea of dignity that he explores in terms of like, taking care of yourself and making a living out of the land versus whatever it is that people in the city are doing. And he also discusses that it's not a judgment, and there's he's nobody to decide what's right and what's wrong. It's just that he feels like he's living a more dignified life if he lives it this way. So I love that aspect of, there's no one size fits all. It's just that this is what he thinks he can be happy with without really passing judgment on them, except when he starts slashing at them because they dared to try and hurt his son. but until then, I really love the exploration of morality in that as well.
It's structurally interesting as well because it does tell the story from the young son's inquisitive mind, and then they talk about Chris, the other son, and kind of fill in the gap, and then we get the backstory kind of that later on, kind of fill in what happened with Chris and his exploration into the city. And I think it's interesting how it ends. Like I'm not winding you up here, but the fact that the son is sort of estranged at the end, with his neighbor and his family at that stage, and he's kind of on the outside looking in, and he's sort of got his own new set of like social parameters there. So
yeah, that was very interesting, and I especially love the last line. They're like, his neighbor brings over the wine. He's like, "Oh, what are we celebrating?" Because they came back and stuff like that, and he's like, "It's Tuesday." And that's like the last line in the whole story. And I was just like, that's brilliant. Because it kind of gives you like the relative of occasions are as arbitrary as anything else. And the relativity of occasions, special occasions. And it kind of points that out in when you have this kind of society that's kind of breaking down like that, all this stuff that we worry about as far as celebrations of this and it's all arbitrary. It's all thrown out the window, and you're just celebrating because it's Tuesday, and and I thought that was just brilliant.
To me, I read that as a bit of a celebration of why the father moved out of the city, because the sort of idea is that the city is the machine, and that you get caught up in making the machine function, whereas they were able to live out in their life in the rural part and celebrate a Tuesday just because it was Tuesday, the same way. So again, interesting concepts that are kind of thrown out in these little short stories, 4 pages or whatever it was.
Yeah, and they're celebrating because they're not blind grape people.
That's right. They're not grapes. That's right.
And did it also feel like a little bit of a miniature Earth Abides?
Yeah, well, do you know, funny, I seen a comment on somebody else had made. It says it's a double dystopia. This future, that they're living out in this rural countryside, a bit like Earth Abides, but actually when they go in the city, it's a different type of dystopia. So it's an interesting kind of idea, and again, the Matrix is a very double dystopia kind of life as well. Between those kind of things and ideas. So again, another one of those classics. Like 1959, really? Like that shit's impressive.
Yep. And I guess the other thing that these kinds of stories bring to light, I do think we've read a couple more about the influence of media and television on people. There was one of the stories called it an idiot box or whatever, right? That no matter what the form of media is, there's always people railing at overconsumption of it, and that's been a thing even in these stories. And and I do think the scale has increased recently, but any new form of information consumption that like keeps you hooked, I guess there's always areas for concern there, and people writing stories or like yelling at the world and saying, like, take a look at yourself and maybe go hiking or something.
These damn kids reading their damn books.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Right?
they
Yeah,
are
when
sensitive.
the
them out
printing
into the
press
wild.
when the printing press was invented, I bet those were conversations that were had.
I wish my son would go out and be a man and conquer a nation.
Yeah.
Like his ancestors intended.
Yeah. He hasn't even killed a goat yet.
Yeah, he hasn't even killed a goat
his
yet.
His
Exactly.
nose in those damn books. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Hasn't even killed a goat yet. All right.
Another great line in here was, memory is merciful too in its imperfection. And I really like that thought, that it, when you have, because he's referring to his, him going nuts and slaughtering the great people because the great people set their robot scorpion on him. So, and so he's referring to, like, he doesn't remember everything that happened there because he kind of went black and nuts and blacked out a bit, but he uses that as a means of dealing with it, that he doesn't need that memory, and that he's hoping his son will also get over the horror he saw his father basically murdering things, and his wife also talks him down from that, saying he'll get over it and stuff like that. So it was just I thought it was a brilliant story. I really liked it.
Yep, this
And
was one of
short.
my favorite ones. Go ahead,
Short,
Jared.
yeah.
And sure.
Yeah. The next one is not. It's by J.G. Ballard. I guess I'll give him a second chance. But we read The Drowned World recently. I wasn't a fan. But he is pretty
Interesting
popular,
ideas.
I guess, science
Yeah.
fiction. He's considered very influential.
Yeah.
China Miéville states him as one of his influences. So
Yeah, you rated Drowned World.
yeah, I did.
Has this podcast thought about, or have you all read or thought about reading Perdido Street Station? It's one I've literally owned for years and haven't read, and I've been meaning to. I've heard it's so weird and interesting.
Varsha and Jared read it with
I have read it.
Angela, wasn't it? Right? I think I haven't read it yet though, Carl. So we can maybe do that together and catch up and do the rest of the trilogy. Possibly that.
There we
that'd be a
go.
good idea.
I haven't read it either. It's on my desk, so
Yeah.
I'm down.
Good.
Very cool.
He's writing
Yeah.
a word, Varsha and Jared.
I wouldn't mind rereading it, but I do want to read on. And there was something that I was reading recently that reminded me of Perdido Street Station.
I recall you saying that. What was it?
There was some sort of, I don't know if we're thinking of the same thing, but there was some big glass house situation recently that reminded me of Perdido Street Station. But anyway, I have been vaguely missing that book, so I wouldn't mind rereading for this podcast.
And
Can
we've
anybody
done
else say?
We've done Embassy Town by Mayville as part of the
Yeah.
podcast as well. So actually going back to Mayville is definitely something that interests.
Yeah, he's someone you hear a lot about in terms of like writing like really unique books, weird
yeah.
fiction, in the genre.
Embassy Town is definitely that. I mean, there's nothing I've ever read that is reminiscent of how you wrote Embassy Town. So
yeah, I haven't read any. I've read the first chapter of Perdido Street Station. I got to Bug Woman and Human Man being in a married relationship, and I was like, oh, interesting. And I never read further than that. So I am intrigued. I've heard it for years. I mean, as one of the modern, weird fantasy horror, like it's one of the like staples. I feel like you hear about a lot.
It's very good.
Yeah, I really like that. We can put it on the wheel or just add
Stick
it
it
to the
on the
schedule
wheel,
whenever
yeah.
you're ready. Yeah, cool.
along with the 9,000 other books, that's the idea. Yeah.
Right. The TBR that never ends.
So we're not living forever to finish this reading list. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I am going to live
Yeah.
forever.
Exactly. I'm coming back to haunt the world until I read the book.
When I die on episode whatever we're doing, you can say the only way Chris was released from this reading schedule was through death.
No, like certain people we know from the Wars of Light and Shadow, you are bound beyond the veil, or
That's
whatever the terminology is in Wars of Light and Shadow.
Do you think
Basha
it's
will
a great
find a way
idea?
to resurrect us.
Mhm.
I think it's a great idea, Ghost, that's like not like miserable because they were like murdered or something and like they stay alive because of that, or some like horrible crime was committed against them. Just like they didn't finish all the books they wanted to read, and so
Yes.
they stay alive after death.
that is such a special kind of unfinished business. But I'm reading a Terry
Exactly.
Pratchett book recently in which the ghost can't touch anything, and I'm like, I'd be very disappointed if I can't eat
Oh,
or read. So I want to be a ghost that can eat and read in that order.
I feel like I would find someone if I couldn't touch anything, and okay, possession's a thing, maybe possess them, but maybe not, and maybe instead like just like harass them until they like, I don't know, become my like Audible or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Audible, the app or the company. Like I there's got to be some medium out there that is willing to like.
You could haunt headphones and listen to whatever audiobook is being played in that headphone.
Oh God, but people love horrible books, so I don't know about that.
No, you get to hop around and pick and choose what headphones you want.
Wow.
Do I have to like float around though and like find the headphones, or is this just like like I'm just like literally jumping from headphone to headphones? Quick traveling.
You can choose by you can think of the book and you will find a headphone for you. We can build a headphone database.
Okay, I like this afterlife.
some
Purgatory
event
is pretty cool. I could unlive with this purgatory for a while.
with some event management, like it'll be an event-driven system. I'll shut up. Okay.
All
All
right.
right.
I
With
think we're
on
a
that
little
note,
off topic.
a little. But it is speculative fiction. So we are
Absolutely. Yeah.
on topic, Jared. I
Yep.
don't know what you're talking about.
So true.
I get it.
You tell him, adjunct.
I get it.
So we'll see everybody next week with the second part of Cloud Atlas and the J.G. Ballard story called The Voices of Time. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. Bye.